My name is Anna Foster, and I've always considered myself a creature of habit. Wake up early, sip my coffee as the sun begins its climb, and head out to teach a room full of bright but challenging teenagers. Teaching has always been more than just a job for me. It's a calling, or at least that's what I tell myself when the days stretch long and the exhaustion runs deep. Living in the small, bustling town of Fairhaven, life had a rhythm, one I rarely questioned. People here knew each other, or at least they thought they did. I was Miss Foster, the devoted teacher, someone dependable, someone strong. But as the world outside grew louder and more unpredictable, I often wondered if anyone truly knew me, including myself. I had my share of struggles, though you wouldn't have known it. I wore my calm like a shield, hiding the lonely evenings in the creeping doubts. Was I doing enough, making a real difference? Or was my life just a series of well-intentioned routines? Those questions whispered at the edge of my mind, especially on nights when silence surrounded me like a heavy fog. Yet there was solace in small, simple rituals. Prayer, for instance. It was never anything grand, a quiet grace before meals, murmured words at bedtime, or fleeting whispers from my students when I felt they needed something beyond what I could give. But truth be told, prayer often felt like sending letters into the void, words spoken but never answered, at least not in ways I could understand. Despite my faith, I struggled to believe it truly made a difference. Fairhaven wasn't a town where big dreams or grand revelations made themselves at home. It was quiet, steady, and predictable, much like my own life. In the mornings, I'd walk past the same shops and wave to the same faces. Mrs. Pierce at the bakery, with her ever-cheerful "Good morning, dear." Young Robbie, delivering newspapers on his rusty old bike. And Mr. Clark, our librarian, always carrying a book tucked under one arm. Fairhaven was a community stitched together by familiarity and routine. Still, there was an undercurrent of restlessness in me, one I couldn't fully understand. It wasn't that I wanted something dramatic or life-changing to happen, but I yearned for more meaning, more connection, more clarity about my place in the world. These thoughts became louder on the quieter nights, the ones spent alone grading papers or staring into the soft glow of my desk lamp. One student in particular had been on my mind that day. Lucy, a bright, curious girl with an unshakable determination that masked a vulnerability she rarely allowed to show. She'd been absent from school for several days, and rumors whispered through the teacher's lounge hinted at trouble at home. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table, I found myself whispering a prayer for her. Please, let her be safe. It was a simple, unpolished prayer, but it carried the weight of my concern. Later, I lay awake in bed, the silence of my small apartment pressing in around me. My thoughts turned once again to my students, each carrying burdens I couldn't always understand. The world outside the walls of Fairhaven, chaotic, uncertain, seemed to weigh heavier with every passing day. I whispered another prayer, this time for all of them. If I'm honest, though, I didn't really expect an answer. Life had a way of lulling me into a rhythm, even when doubts tried to creep in. The next day was unremarkable. Morning coffee, hurried lesson plans, and the steady hum of teenage energy that filled my classroom. By mid-afternoon, I found myself guiding the students through a literature exercise about finding meaning in metaphors. As the day drew to a close, I felt the familiar pull of exhaustion. It was the good kind, the sort that comes from giving your all, but it still left me drained. As I packed up my things, I glanced at the clock. Almost 6 p.m. I'd stayed later than intended, again. Walking home through the streets of Fairhaven, I thought about Lucy, wondering if I'd see her back in class the next day. The weight of my concern lingered, mingling with the lingering restlessness I couldn't shake. When I got home, the emptiness of my apartment welcomed me. I dropped my bag by the door and kicked off my shoes, the familiar ache in my feet a reminder of the long day. My small living room, cozy but unremarkable, seemed quieter than usual. The thought of cooking dinner felt like too much effort, so I settled for a cup of tea and sank into the couch. I closed my eyes for what I thought would be a moment, allowing the warmth of the tea and the soft hum of the heater to lull me into a fleeting sense of calm. But then, an unexpected wave of dizziness washed over me. It started subtly, like the room shifting slightly out of focus, but soon it was as if I were caught in a swirling current. My chest tightened, and panic rose as I realized I couldn't catch my breath. I tried to stand, to reach for my phone on the coffee table, but my body refused to respond. Fear gripped me. I felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears, each beat growing weaker, fainter. My vision blurred and the world around me faded into shadows. In those final moments, a thought crossed my mind, sharp and clear. Is this it? Am I dying? And then everything stopped. No sound, no pain, no fear, just stillness. I opened my eyes, at least I thought I did, and the world was no longer as I knew it. The couch, the room, even the weight of my own body had disappeared. I was floating, untethered, in a vast expanse of light and silence. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, an overwhelming sense of peace washing over me. For the first time in years, the questions and doubts that had haunted me seemed to dissolve, replaced by a profound stillness. I wasn't sure where I was or how I had arrived, but one thing was certain. This was the moment that would change everything. It started off like any other day, routine, predictable, safe. I woke up with the sun peeking through my curtains, made my coffee, and prepared for another day at school. By the time I was seated in my classroom, surrounded by the familiar buzz of youthful energy, I was fully immersed in my work. Lesson plans, grading assignments, and guiding conversations. It felt like an ordinary Tuesday, yet something lingered beneath the surface. A heaviness I couldn't quite put my finger on. Was it the burden of another long day, or perhaps the subtle ache of loneliness I'd grown accustomed to? Whatever it was, it pressed against my thoughts, faint but persistent. I shook it off, focusing instead on my students, on Lucy. She finally returned to class today. Lucy was quiet as always, seated near the back of the room, her notebook resting on the desk like a shield. I caught her glancing at me a few times during the lesson, her expression unreadable. I wondered if she felt the same weight pressing against her spirit, though hers likely came from a very different place. Her home life wasn't easy. I'd pieced that much together from our brief conversations. Something told me that her struggles ran deeper than what she was willing to share. When the school day ended, I lingered behind as I often did, finishing up lesson plans for the week and organizing papers. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly, and the faint scent of chalk and markers hung in the air. I could hear voices echoing down the hallway, the custodians wrapping up their work, and the occasional laughter of students who stayed late for extracurricular activities. It was close to 6 when I finally left the building, the soft glow of the street lights illuminating the path ahead. Fairhaven's streets were quiet, as they often were in the evenings. A cool breeze rustled the trees, carrying with it the scent of earth and distant rain. I glanced up at the sky and noticed the clouds gathering. A storm was coming. As I reached my apartment and stepped inside, the familiar comfort of home greeted me. My bag landed on the floor with a thud, and I kicked off my shoes, too tired to care about the mess. The silence of the apartment was both soothing and suffocating. I poured myself a cup of tea and sank onto the couch, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders as the chill from outside seeped through the walls. The heaviness that had lingered all day seemed to grow stronger in the quiet of the evening. I found myself thinking about Lucy again, about her guarded smile and the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was looking. Without thinking, I whispered a prayer for her. Please let her find some peace. It was an imperfect prayer, raw and unpolished, but it carried the weight of my concern. The tea in my hands grew cold as I sat there, staring at the shadows cast by the lamplight. Outside, the wind began to howl, rattling the windows in their frames. I closed my eyes, intending only to rest for a moment, but the storm outside seemed to echo the turmoil within me. That's when it happened. It started subtly, a faint dizziness, like the room tilting ever so slightly. At first I thought it was exhaustion, the kind that often left me drained after long days. But then the sensation grew stronger, waves of nausea rolling through me. My chest tightened and I struggled to catch my breath. Panic surged as I realized I couldn't move. My arms, my legs, they refused to respond. It was as if my body had betrayed me, shutting down without warning. I tried to scream, to call for help, but my voice was swallowed by the silence. The walls seemed to close in around me, their edges blurring as my vision darkened. Am I dying? The thought pierced through the chaos in my mind, sharp and clear. Fear gripped me, cold and unrelenting. I fought against the stillness, against the weight pressing down on my chest. But as the world faded into darkness, a strange calm began to take hold. And then everything stopped. No sound, no pain, no fear, just stillness. It was a silence unlike anything I'd ever known, profound and all-encompassing. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my living room anymore. In fact, I wasn't anywhere I recognized. I was suspended in an endless expanse of light and quiet. The heaviness that had weighed me down disappeared, replaced by a sensation I struggled to describe. Freedom, weightlessness, peace. It was as if I'd been untethered from the physical world, floating in a realm beyond comprehension. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, or rather what I was feeling. There was no ground beneath me, no walls around me, no sky above me, just light. Warm and alive, it pulsed gently, surrounding me like an embrace. I felt myself sinking into it, not with fear, but with an overwhelming sense of belonging. It wasn't long before I noticed something strange. Out of the corner of my awareness, I saw a figure, a body, my body. It lay still, motionless, on the couch where I had collapsed. Pale and fragile, it seemed so distant, like a discarded shell. I should have felt alarmed at the sight, but instead I felt oddly detached. It was like observing someone else's story, a character in a play I had long forgotten. I drifted closer, studying the body that had once been mine. My chest wasn't rising or falling. My lungs weren't drawing air. There was no life left in the figure before me. Yet somehow I didn't feel afraid. I felt curious, almost serene, as if deep down I understood what was happening, even if my rational mind couldn't quite catch up. As I stared at my lifeless body, a new sensation began to pull at me. It wasn't physical, but it was unmistakable, a gentle tug, urging me away from the scene. I didn't resist. The pull was comforting, familiar, as if it were guiding me toward something greater. The space around me began to shift, the light growing brighter, warmer, more vibrant. I felt as though I were being wrapped in a blanket, not of fabric but of pure love. It filled every corner of my being, chasing away any remnants of fear or doubt. And then I felt it, a presence. It wasn't something I could see or touch, but I knew it was there, powerful and undeniable. It radiated compassion, understanding, and an all-encompassing love. I felt as though it could see every part of me, the doubts I'd carried, the prayers I'd whispered, the struggles I'd hidden from the world. And yet, it loved me. Completely unconditionally. The presence didn't speak, not in words, but its message was clear. You are safe. You are loved. I let myself sink into the moment, into the warmth and light that surrounded me. Time seemed to lose its meaning, stretching and folding in ways I couldn't understand. All that mattered was the peace that enveloped me, the feeling of being held by something far greater than myself. And so began the journey that would redefine everything I thought I knew about life, about prayer, about love. When I opened my eyes, if eyes were even the right word, I felt as though I'd stepped into a dream that wasn't mine. The world around me, if it could even be called a world, was unlike anything I'd ever seen or imagined. It wasn't bound by the rules I had always known. Gravity, time, space. Instead, it seemed limitless, alive, and pulsing with something I could only describe as the essence of existence itself. The quiet wasn't the kind of emptiness that fills a room when no one is home. It was alive, vibrating with energy and meaning, I floated, suspended in an endless sea of light, not as a body, but as something more. I felt weightless, yet grounded, free, yet connected. The light wrapped around me like a mother's embrace, warm and loving, filling me with a peace so profound I could barely grasp it. At first I tried to orient myself, to understand where I was or how I had come to be here, but the harder I tried to think, the less I seemed to understand. There were no markers, no horizons, no up or down, just light, soft, radiant, flowing light. It moved, alive and full of purpose, as though it carried stories and truths in its currents. As I let go of the need to comprehend, I began to feel instead. The emotions were overwhelming: love, acceptance, peace. And not the fleeting kind of peace that comes and goes. This was eternal, profound, and unshakable. I felt whole, like every fragmented piece of me had suddenly been drawn together and gently mended. For the first time, I understood what it meant to belong. Then I noticed something strange. Out of the corner of my awareness, I saw a figure, or rather a body. It was mine, lying still, pale and lifeless. At first, the sight of it jarred me. Shouldn't I have been terrified? But no fear came, only a sense of detachment. I drifted closer, studying the face that had been mine, the hands that had written countless papers, the chest that no longer rose and fell. That body was me, and yet it wasn't. It was a shell left behind. I turned my focus outward, away from the body and toward the vast expanse of light surrounding me. It felt alive, almost sentient, as though it could see every part of me, the doubts I'd carried, the prayers I'd whispered, the love I'd shared. And as it saw me, it loved me completely, not in the conditional way humans often love, but fully and unconditionally. I felt naked before it, yet never judged. Every part of me was embraced, even the parts I struggled to accept. Suddenly, I became aware of a presence. It wasn't something I could see, touch, or define, but I knew it was there. It was powerful, immense, and yet intimately familiar. As it drew near, I felt my entire being flooded with emotions: love, compassion, understanding. It wasn't a person or a figure, it was simply there, and its presence filled every corner of this ethereal realm. For the first time I felt a pull, not physical but spiritual. It guided me gently, leading me deeper into the light. I followed willingly, sensing that whatever lay ahead was something I was meant to encounter. The space around me shifted, the light growing warmer and more vibrant with every step, or perhaps every thought. Then the presence spoke, not with words but with knowing. Its voice wasn't heard but felt, resonating through every fiber of my existence. "You are safe," it said. "You are loved." Tears filled my eyes, not out of sadness, but out of sheer gratitude and awe. I whispered back, though I wasn't sure how I could even speak. "Why am I here? What is this place?" The response came gently, wrapping around me like the light itself. "You are here to see, to understand, to remember." Before I could ask what it meant, the space around me began to shift again. The light dimmed slightly, though it remained warm and comforting. In its place, images began to appear, not memories, but moments. They unfolded before me like scenes from a story, vivid and real, yet somehow more than real. I saw myself as a child, kneeling by my bed, reciting the bedtime prayers my mother had taught me. At the time, those prayers had felt simple, routine, nothing more than words. But now, as I watched the scene play out, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Ripples of light emanated from those prayers, stretching outward and touching places and people I didn't recognize. "What is that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Your prayers," the presence replied. "Every prayer carries power more than you can imagine, even the ones you think are small." The truth of its words struck me deeply. How many prayers had I whispered over the years, thinking they were insignificant? How often had I doubted their impact, assuming they were just words fading into the void? Yet here I could see their ripples, the light they carried, the lives they touched. The scene shifted again. And now I saw myself sitting at my desk, late at night, grading papers. I remembered that moment vividly, how I had whispered a prayer for one of my students, a young girl named Lucy who had been struggling with troubles at home. At the time, I'd felt helpless, unsure of how to truly help her. But now as I watched, I saw the light again. This time, it wasn't just a ripple, it was a surge, powerful and far-reaching. I could see it touching Lucy's home, her parents, even strangers I didn't recognize. My simple prayer had set something in motion, something far greater than I had ever understood. The presence spoke again, its voice filled with warmth and certainty. Every prayer, every act of love, creates ripples that reach far beyond what you can see. The scenes unfolded before me, one after another, each carrying the same message, that even the smallest acts of love and faith could create waves of light that stretched across eternity. And as I watched, I began to understand a truth I had long forgotten, or perhaps had never known. This journey wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence, the courage to keep trying, to keep choosing love, even when it felt small or insignificant. I hadn't come here to be judged or condemned. I had come here to remember. And as the light around me began to fade, giving way to the physical world I had left behind, I knew I would never be the same. In the moments after the visions faded in the ethereal realm, I felt a quiet intensity settle over everything. I sensed that something, or someone, was drawing near. The light had softened into a gentle glow, and as I floated in that boundless space, I became aware of an unmistakable presence approaching. It was not a being in the usual sense, but rather an overwhelming sensation of compassionate energy that filled every corner of my awareness. I remember feeling a subtle vibration in the air around me, as if the very fabric of this realm was shifting. My heart, once still trembling from the shock of seeing the ripples of my prayers, now pounded with anticipation. There was no fear, only an urgent curiosity and an openness waiting to be embraced. In that moment, I realized that this presence was not separate from me, but a part of the universal love that connected everything. I found myself yearning to understand it, to let it speak directly to my soul. As the presence drew near, I felt it caress my inner being, its warmth seeping into me like a comforting embrace. I could not distinguish its form, for it was formless and yet complete, like an all-encompassing tide of serenity. I closed my eyes and listened with every fiber of my being, as though I might capture its message in the silence of my mind. Gradually, a gentle vibration, almost like a whisper, echoed through me. Though no audible words were spoken, I could feel clear communication, a deep, unspoken understanding that transcended language. With each passing moment, the presence grew more defined in my heart. I asked silently, "Who are you? What is your purpose here?" The answer was not delivered in the conventional sense, but came as a flood of emotions, a cascade of warmth, hope, and tender understanding. I felt as though centuries of wisdom were shared with me in the span of a heartbeat. It told me that it was the embodiment of divine compassion, a timeless guide meant to remind me that no one is ever truly alone. I remember feeling a profound sense of relief and reassurance as I absorbed this knowledge. The presence seemed to say, "Your doubts and fears are part of the human story, but your heart holds the power to heal, to create change, and to light the way for others." In that moment, I recognized that this encounter was not a mere accident, but a deliberate turning point. Every hardship, every unanswered prayer, and every moment of loneliness had led me to this intersection of light and understanding. As I floated there, I sensed our energies intertwining in a dance of silent communion. I reached out with my mind, trying to grasp the fullness of this divine energy, and learned that the key was not in speaking or questioning, but in surrendering and listening. I felt the presence gently guide me through memories I thought were lost to time, the simple, heartfelt thoughts I'd once carried during moments of despair. Suddenly I recalled the soft smile of a student whose eyes had lit up when she finally felt seen, the quiet thankfulness of a colleague who had once found solace in a shared moment of hope, and even my own hidden tears of uncertainty that had fell in solitude. In this sacred communion, I began to understand that the presence was a mirror reflecting the infinite capacity for love inherent in every human soul. It emphasized that every act of compassion and every prayer, no matter how small, resonated throughout the universe. I learned that these small ripples were powerful beyond measure, connecting me to the grand tapestry of life in ways I had never imagined. It was as though the presence was calling me to reclaim my own light, to trust in the quiet strength that had always existed within me. The experience was as transformative as it was ephemeral. I felt the presence offering me a final piece of wisdom before gently guiding me toward the next stage of my journey. With a warmth that seemed to dissolve the very boundaries of loneliness and doubt, it impressed upon me the importance of returning to the world with an open heart. Your light, it conveyed without uttering a single word, is needed now more than ever. Bring forth your truth, and let love be your guide. In that timeless moment, I felt a surge of gratitude unlike anything I had ever experienced. I realized that I was now part of something far larger than my individual life, a cosmic network of hearts and hopes, where love was both the path and the destination. The presence, which had come to me in silence, left an indelible mark on my soul. It restored my faith in the power of prayer and reminded me of the quiet strength that could transform even the darkest despair into radiant hope. As the luminous field around me began to gently recede, the presence receded too, never gone, but lingering like an eternal whisper in my mind. The transition back to my physical self was gradual, yet inevitable. I floated toward the edge of this ethereal domain, carrying with me the essence of the encounter. I understood that although I might soon return to the world I knew, the guidance and the love I had received would stay with me forever. The encounter with the presence was a sacred milestone on my journey, a reaffirmation that, even in our most fragile moments, we are embraced by forces of boundless love. I emerged from that celestial communion with a renewed sense of purpose and a determination to carry the light of the presence back into every corner of my ordinary life. Now, every heartbeat whispers the promise that love indeed conquers all. After my encounter with the transcendent presence, my whole perspective shifted. I found myself reviewing memories with a new lens, a lens that magnified the importance of the simplest actions. Every moment, every quiet gesture, now seemed to hold a secret power. I started noticing that what I had once dismissed as insignificant, small acts of kindness, whispered prayers during moments of solitude, even a fleeting smile, created ripples that extended far beyond my immediate sight. One morning, as I prepared for school, I recalled a memory from my early career. I remembered a day when I offered a sincere compliment to a student who rarely spoke up. A simple, heartfelt, "I believe in you." At the time, I thought little of that brief exchange. It was just another part of my day. Yet later I learned that this small act had sparked a change in her, empowering her to overcome challenges she had long hidden. The idea resonated within me like a soft, constant echo. Every small act holds the power to transform lives. Motivated by this recollection, I began to observe the subtle interplay of light and love in the world around me. On my walk to school, I noticed how the morning air shimmered with possibility. I greeted passers-by, a nod, a smile, a simple good morning. Each greeting felt like a prayer, an offering of connection that brightened not only their day but also my own. I couldn't shake the image of those ripples of light that the presence had shown me, expanding outward, touching lives in ways I had never realized. At school, I took a moment during a busy day to reach out to Lucy. I recalled how her quiet battles often went unnoticed, and that even a small word of encouragement might change the trajectory of her life. I pulled her aside and softly said, "I see you, Lucy. I'm here if you ever need to talk." Her eyes widened, and in that brief silence, I sensed an inner strength reigniting. It was as if my small act of recognition had given her permission to breathe a little easier, to believe once more in her own strength. Later that afternoon, while grading papers in the quiet of my classroom after the last bell had rung, I became aware of the power in my own routine actions. Each correction on a paper, each note in the margins, was more than just a mark of academic performance. It was a gesture imbued with care and hope. I imagined that every time I reached for my red pen, I was, in a small way, reaching out to guide a young mind toward a brighter future. I began to feel that the cumulative effect of these small deeds constituted a profound act of nurturing, one capable of healing invisible wounds. That evening, I sat in my modest living room reflecting on the events of the day. In the gentle glow of a desk lamp, I remembered another instance, a time when a neighbor, burdened with grief, had silently dropped by my door. I prepared tea, offered a quiet embrace, and listened intently without judgment. The neighbor left with tears in her eyes, but also with a spark of hope rekindled. In that memory, I saw a clear thread connecting that moment of compassion to the larger tapestry of life. It wasn't the grandeur of heroics I was witnessing, but rather the simple day-to-day choices that wove us all together in a network of mutual care. I began to document these moments in a private journal, capturing each humble act of kindness. I wrote about the quiet heroism in a whispered prayer, the warm smile shared in passing, and even the solitary, unobserved moments when someone chose to reach out despite their own pain. With every entry, I started to see a pattern, a chain reaction of light. It was as if every drop of compassion created ripples that eventually culminated in waves of transformation. In the days that followed, these reflections propelled me to be more intentional. I made a conscious decision to cultivate these small acts of love, believing that each one contributed to a collective shift in the energy of the world. Every time I stepped into my classroom, I carried with me the knowledge that my actions echoed in the lives of my students, even in the smallest ways. I found power in the gentle, persistent way that love reached out and touched another person's heart. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging day, I found myself reflecting on the interplay between light and darkness. I remembered the image of dark forms receding before the surge of light in my visions, a symbolic reminder that even the tiniest beacon of love could break through despair. I sat for a long while, letting the thought wash over me, until I realized that every act of care was my personal rebellion against the darkness. In that moment, I resolved to continue uplifting those around me with all I had, no matter how minor the gesture might seem. I knew then that my journey was not about grand miracles or dramatic transformations. It was about the quiet power of sustained, genuine care, a continuous offering of light, one that, when added up over a lifetime, could change the course of countless destinies. The small acts were not insignificant. They were the building blocks of hope, the silent architects of a better world. As I closed my journal that night, the words on the page resonated with a newfound clarity. Every fleeting moment of kindness was a testament to a truth I had now come to cherish. The power of small acts is immeasurable, and every loving gesture, however modest, has the ability to create ripples that extend far beyond what the eye can see. I went to sleep that night with a heart full of gratitude, knowing that tomorrow would bring another opportunity to let my light shine, one small act at a time. It wasn't long after I embraced the power of small acts that I began to sense an undercurrent of struggle, a quiet, insidious battle between light and darkness that played out not only in the world around me, but within my very soul. In the weeks following my encounters in the ethereal realm, I found that my daily life was increasingly a dance between hope and despair, tenderness and pain. Every morning, as I stepped into the soft glow of dawn, the promise of a new day filled me with determination. I'd greet the sunrise with silent prayers and affirmations, a pledge to carry forward the light I had been shown. Yet, as the day unfolded, shadows would often emerge, moments of self-doubt, unsolicited regrets, and creeping worries that threatened to overwhelm me. It was as if the darkness sensed my newfound brightness and sought to challenge it, testing the strength of my resolve. One particular afternoon, after a long day at school, I experienced this internal battle more vividly than ever. I sat alone in a quiet classroom, grading papers and reflecting on the day's events. The familiar hum of fluorescent lights did little to steady my racing heart. Instead, memories and what-ifs crowded my mind. I recalled instances when I'd faltered, the times when I had hesitated to reach out to a struggling student, the moments I had allowed frustration to cloud my empathy. In those moments, an unfamiliar gloom seeped into my spirit. It wasn't the cold absence of light, but rather a heavy, dense feeling of regret and worry that threatened to snuff out the hope I carried. That evening, when I finally sat down at my modest kitchen table with a cup of tea, I found my thoughts divided. On one side lay the soft, nurturing light of countless small acts of kindness, and each prayer that had rippled out into the lives of others. On the other, the darkness, a reminder of every missed opportunity, every harsh word left unsaid, every instance when fear held me back from embracing love fully. The juxtaposition of these forces became impossible to ignore, and I felt compelled to confront them head-on. I began to write, pouring my conflicted emotions onto paper in a desperate attempt to understand the nature of my internal struggle. With each sentence, I acknowledged that the darkness was not something external to fear. It was part of me. It lived in the corners of my heart, fueled by my own insecurities. Yet, as I wrote, I sensed a quiet rebellion forming within, a refusal to let that darkness define me. I recognized that the battle between light and darkness was not a one-time confrontation, but an ongoing contest of will and spirit. In the solitude of that evening, the memory of my ethereal encounters returned like a soft echo. I recalled the warm, guiding presence that had whispered words of reassurance, words that proclaimed, "Every prayer, every act of love has the power to break through despair." That voice urged me to see the contrast between my small, brave gestures and the weight of all my missteps. It became clear that the darkness was not an enemy to be vanquished immediately. Instead, it was a part of the human experience, a necessary counterbalance that made the light all the more precious. As I worked through these feelings, I decided to take deliberate action. The next day at school, I sought out a student who had recently withdrawn after a series of challenges at home. I offered her a compassionate ear, sharing more of the kindness I'd cultivated. I wasn't just proffering a solution, I was acknowledging that in her pain, I too had faced moments of darkness. And though my words were gentle, they carried the undeniable truth of someone who had been in the shadows and had found a way to hold on to the light. I began to see that every encounter with darkness required its own tender confrontation, a mindful, compassionate assertion that love and hope are always within reach. When I felt the despair creeping in during long, lonely nights, I reminded myself that every small act of kindness was my personal testimony against the oppressive weight of negativity. In that regard, the battle was not about winning or losing, it was about continuing to choose the light, moment after moment. During quiet reflections in the late hours, I started to view the darkness as a catalyst for growth rather than just an enemy. Each struggle, each shadow of doubt, was an invitation to rediscover the strength of my conviction. I realized that my inner battles had taught me lessons about perseverance and the resilience of hope. With time, those painful moments began to transform into opportunities for deeper understanding, patient mentors that showed me how to live more truthfully, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Though there were still moments when the darkness threatened to engulf all that I had built up, I now recognized that my light, fueled by prayer, compassionate acts, and the vivid memories of every smile I'd shared, was resilient and expansive. I started to see that it wasn't a matter of one force triumphing over the other, but rather of the interplay between the two, each giving shape to the texture of my life. In embracing both, I was learning what it truly meant to be human, to acknowledge the imperfections and scars, while still striving for a luminous, enduring hope. Coming to terms with the battle between light and darkness helped me reclaim a profound sense of balance. I knew that on the toughest days it might be the smallest whisper of hope, a congratulatory nod from a student or a kind word exchanged in passing, that would remind me of the power we all hold. And so, armed with the insight that the darkness could never fully extinguish the light as long as I continued to nurture it, I resolved to press on, undaunted, steadfast, and determined to let every small act of love be my answer to all that would threaten to diminish my flame. In the weeks following the tumultuous struggle between light and darkness, I began to perceive a larger design unfolding around me, a design that wove together every life, every act, every whispered prayer into a magnificent tapestry. This was the tapestry of humanity, and in it I recognized that every thread, however seemingly insignificant, held meaning and beauty. I started noticing the interconnectedness of everything while commuting to school. On the bus, I saw strangers sharing smiles and brief nods of acknowledgement, a kind gesture silently affirming that despite our differences, we are all part of one vibrant network. It was as if each of us carried our unique light, and when these lights intersected, they created constellations of hope that decorated the everyday sky. In those moments, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude that I was never truly isolated. I was part of a continuum that embraced me even on the darkest days. One day, while passing by a community garden on my way home, I stopped to admire the patchwork of vibrant blooms and carefully tended plots. Each plant, nurtured by the care of different hands, told its own story, stories of perseverance, love, struggle, and renewal. I was reminded that every soul, much like each delicate flower, contributes to the overall beauty of our shared existence. That day, the garden transformed before my eyes into a living metaphor for the human spirit, diverse, resilient, and interconnected. Back at school, I began to notice the subtle ways in which my interactions with students echoed on a grand scale. I recalled Lucy's timid smile when I took the time to ask about her day, the spark of recognition in a quiet student's eyes when I praised his effort, and even the silent nod of a colleague who had found courage to ask for help. Each of these moments, no matter how small, rippled outward. It was as if love and compassion, once set into motion, wove themselves into a larger fabric, threads overlapping, intertwining, reinforcing one another until they formed an unbreakable bond. As the days passed, I noticed the impact of my actions in ways I had not anticipated. A student who once struggled with self-doubt now stood a little taller in class. A friend who had been weighed down by grief seemed to rediscover a spark of joy. I was learning that the tapestry of humanity was not constructed overnight. It was built, thread by thread, in every conversation, every shared tear, every expression of kindness. The realization warmed my heart. My life, with all its ups and downs, was an essential part of this glorious design. One evening, after a particularly reflective day, I sat by my window watching the city lights come to life. I pondered how each window glowed with its own story. In those small orbs, I imagined lives that resonated with love, loss, hope, and endless dreams. I realized that each one was like a tiny thread in a vast, intricate fabric, a tapestry that, when viewed as a whole, depicted the collective heartbeat of humanity. I thought about how even the simplest acts, like a smile offered to a stranger or a few kind words shared with a friend, could alter the pattern of the fabric, adding new hues of hope and resilience. During these moments of introspection, I began journaling my thoughts, trying to capture the beauty of the interwoven human experience. I wrote of the small miracles of connection, the way a teacher's encouragement could unlock a student's potential, or how a grieving neighbor's quiet resilience could inspire a lesson in empathy. My pages filled with sketches of life, a mosaic of moments that piece by piece told the story of humanity's indomitable spirit. Every entry, every memory was another thread in this tapestry, each one a testament to the unseen forces that bound us together. I became increasingly aware that the tapestry of humanity was not just a poetic metaphor, it was a call to action. The more I understood it, the more I felt compelled to contribute my own threads with intention and love. Instead of seeing my individual struggles as isolated tragedies, I began to view them as integral parts of a much larger, ever-evolving story. Each tear, each smile, every quiet word of encouragement became bearings of a legacy that stretched far beyond the confines of my day-to-day life. Moreover, I realized that every person around me was both a weaver and a thread, actively participating in the creation of this endless fabric. In every story of triumph or hardship, there was a reminder that we were all interconnected. That revelation transformed how I approached each day. It emboldened me to be more open, more empathetic, and to nurture connections with a fervor I had never known before. Standing amid the ebb and flow of life, I knew I was an essential part of a dynamic masterpiece, a tapestry where every human experience mattered. I felt both humbled and exhilarated by the possibility that even the smallest contributions could alter the grand design. These thoughts provided me with a profound sense of purpose, to live authentically, to share my heart openly, and to continuously add my own radiant threads to the intricate pattern of our shared existence. As I closed my journal each night, I let the image of that vibrant tapestry fill my mind. I carried within me the certainty that every act of kindness, every whispered prayer, and every loving gesture was part of the infinite pattern that held us all together. In that reflection, I found peace, purpose, and the unshakable belief in the beauty of humanity. I awoke to the sound of a steady beep in a dimly lit room. Slowly, I opened my eyes to see the familiar sterile white of a hospital ceiling. The experience in the ethereal realm still pulsed in my memory as clearly as if it were happening again. Yet here I was, body tethered to physical reality once more. The transition was jarring. One moment, I had been suspended in an endless sea of light, and the next I found myself in a hospital bed, IV in my arm and monitors tracking every heartbeat. For a time I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or if waking was simply another phase of the mystery I had just escaped. My mind raced with questions. Had the presence truly guided me? Was the vivid tapestry of interconnected lives I had witnessed nothing more than a fleeting vision? These thoughts mingled with the clinical buzz of the machines and the soft murmurs of the nurses who came to check on me. Despite the relief on their faces, I felt a profound weight, a realization that the world I had returned to was both familiar and profoundly changed by what I had seen. In the days following my recovery, every sound and every sight seemed to carry a new vibrancy. Strolling through the hospital corridors, I noticed how even the hum of fluorescent lights now felt alive with purpose. I marveled at the determination in every step I took as I returned to my daily routine. Yet the lingering aftermath of the experience left me with an aching longing for the freedom I had known in that light-filled realm. Once discharged, I stepped back into the world with the weight of both doubt and hope. The streets that I once traversed with an almost automatic familiarity now seemed to whisper endless possibilities. My home, once a sanctuary of routine, had transformed into a symbol of rebirth, a stage for the next part of my journey. I began to observe the familiar details anew, the way the morning dew shimmered in the soft light, or how a neighbor's smile carried a quiet strength. Everything seemed imbued with a deeper meaning, as though the tapestry of humanity had shifted to incorporate my own luminous threads. Returning to my classroom was both a relief and a challenge. I approached my students with a renewed sense of purpose, eager to share not just the curriculum, but the lessons I had learned about the fragility and resilience of life. I listened with greater empathy, noticing the subtleties in their expressions, those small signs of struggle and fleeting moments of joy. I found that every question they asked or every nod they offered gave me a small spark of the interconnectedness I had seen in that ethereal realm. Yet there were moments when the old routines clashed with the vivid memories of my experiences. A routine call of the bell, the mundane chatter in the hallways, even the clatter at the local cafe, all triggered a dissonance in my soul. I became painfully aware that I was no longer the same person who had once accepted life with quiet resignation. I had been irrevocably transformed by the encounter with the divine light and by the intimate dialogue with a mysterious presence that had shown me the power of every solution, every compassionate act. The understanding I received in that timeless space now demanded to be lived out in every encounter. I remember one particularly crisp autumn afternoon when, while walking home, I paused at the corner where a small group of strangers huddled, sharing warm drinks and laughter in the fading light. In that moment, I recognized the crucial lesson that returning to the world meant embracing contrast, that our shared humanity emerged from both our collective triumphs and our vulnerabilities. I joined them. We exchanged stories about our days and dreams, and I listened with an intensity that came from having seen beyond the veil. Their ordinary struggles and joys appeared as brilliant threads woven into the vast tapestry of existence that I now understood so intimately. With each interaction, I started building bridges between the insights I'd gained and the tangible reality around me. I began hosting small gatherings at my home where friends and colleagues could share ideas, stories, and prayers. These gatherings became spaces of gentle transformation, a way to translate the deep, ineffable language of the ethereal realm into the everyday acts of love and kindness. I encouraged everyone to speak of their own moments of light and shadow, hoping that our collective sharing might be the spark for changes far beyond our individual lives. Returning to the world was not a retreat into the ordinary. Instead, it felt like stepping forward with a heart that had grown expansive and nuanced. I carried the invisible but powerful remnants of that presence within me, a quiet assurance that what I had experienced was genuine, that every prayer whispered in solitude had meaning. Even on days when sadness or a sense of being overwhelmed threatened to eclipse the light, I recalled the transformative power of a small act of love that rippled outwards across time and space. In time, I learned to balance the ephemeral beauty of the ethereal realm with the tangible details of everyday life. The hospital room, the bustling streets, and even the fragrant bloom of a solitary flower in a city park were now seen as sacred. Each was a reminder that the journey of returning to the world meant integrating the divine spark within the most ordinary moments. As I sit here now, reflecting on those initial days of re-emerging into a world that once felt mundane, I know that every heartbeat has become a silent prayer, a vow to live fully in both the light and the shadow. I now understand that to truly return to the world is not to leave behind the ethereal, but to merge its truths with every breath I take, every step I witness, and every connection that weaves us together in this extraordinary tapestry of life. The days melded into one another after I returned to the world, but I soon realized that nothing could ever be as mundane as it once was. With every sunrise, I awoke to the promise of a new opportunity, an opportunity to live the truth that the ethereal realm and the subsequent encounters had revealed to me. I knew I had been forever changed, not merely in my perceptions, but in the very essence of who I was. This chapter, then, is about the journey beyond transformation, a journey toward living that truth each day, in every choice, and in every shared moment of grace. Adjusting to normalcy was a gradual process. In the weeks that followed my return, I found myself continually reminded of the delicate balance between the ethereal and the everyday. I began to see that every act and every gesture, no matter how small, carried a trace of that divine light. It was no longer enough to simply remember the miraculous vision, but I had to allow it to inform my every word and deed. My rituals, morning prayers, quiet meditations, and even the mindful way I sipped my coffee, became a living link between the transcendent and the tangible. At work, I started to share more openly the lessons I had learned. I didn't preach or compel, rather. I listened and gently interjected with stories of my own struggles and triumphs. I recalled the moments when a simple word of encouragement lifted a student's spirit, or when a quiet act of kindness turned around a difficult day. These experiences became my truth, a truth that was no longer confined to the realm of spiritual rapture, but woven into the very fabric of daily existence. I saw them as proof that even in the humdrum of everyday life, love and hope had the power to transform. Outside the classroom, I began hosting intimate gatherings with friends and neighbors. In these circles, words flowed freely about our fears, dreams, and the subtle miracles we encountered in passing. We spoke of hardship, yet we rejoiced in our collective strength, acknowledging that each of our lives was a vital thread in the vast tapestry of humanity. I watched as people, inspired by shared vulnerability, began to forge deeper connections with each other, with their families, and with themselves. Living the truth meant accepting that darkness was part of us, but it also meant committing to lighting the corners of our shared world with our individual sparks of brilliance. One evening, while walking alone under a vault of starlit sky, I paused at a quiet park bench. The cool air carried the sound of distant laughter and gentle music from an open window nearby. In that moment, I realized that the truth I had discovered was not an isolated wonder but a communal inheritance. My inner dialogue echoed the lessons I had learned. Every prayer, every act of love, every small yet significant gesture was both a declaration and an invitation. It declared that I was not alone, that I was part of an intricate design, and it invited everyone to contribute a little more of themselves to the greater good. However, living the truth was not without its challenges. There were days when the old habits threatened to overshadow my new vision, days when skepticism, fear, or the weight of life's burdens made me question whether I was capable of sustaining the light within. During those moments, I would close my eyes and summon the memory of that divine presence, the reassuring warmth that echoed in my heart. I reminded myself that the truth was not about being perfect or always radiant. It was about perseverance, the daily commitment to choose love over despair, to reach out even when it was hard, and to trust that every act, no matter how small, mattered. Gradually, I noticed a subtle shift in those around me as well. A student who once hesitated to share her ideas burst forth with creative passion. A colleague who had grown quiet and reserved began speaking with renewed conviction, and even a stranger on a busy street would sometimes share a smile that felt like an unspoken acknowledgement of our shared human journey. These moments, though fleeting, reinforced my belief that the light I carried was contagious. It had the power to inspire, to heal, and to shift the course of lives in ways that could scarcely be measured. Living the truth became more than a personal mantra. It evolved into a way of being. I began to document not just my thoughts, but the gentle victories, the instances of collective grace that reminded me why I had undergone this transformation. I filled pages of my journal with reflections on love, struggle, and the remarkable web of human connection. Over time, that journal became a testament to life's delicate balance. It was proof that even when faced with the most arduous challenges, the human spirit was resilient enough to illuminate the darkest corners. Now, as I sit here reflecting on the journey so far, I feel a deep sense of fulfillment. I understand that living the truth is an ongoing commitment, one that requires constant self-compassion and the willingness to embrace both the light and the darkness. My life is a tapestry of countless threads, a mosaic of experiences that collectively tell the story of a spirit that chose to shine despite life's inevitable shadows. In every conversation, every quiet moment of reflection, and every courageous act of kindness, I find the echo of that divine presence and the realization that love, in all its forms, is the ultimate truth. I carry this understanding forward with unwavering faith, ever mindful that the smallest acts can ripple outward, changing the world one heartbeat at a time.